My cheating wife planned to get pregnant with her lover, but I exposed them, and she ended up going to prison our junior year. I met Cindy, who was studying for a degree in education and business administration, while I was studying engineering, hoping to be the first person in my family to graduate from college. Her dream was to follow in her parents' footsteps and get an education. Influenced by her parents, she believed in learning new things every day. This philosophy resonated with me, as my parents, who ran a small farm, also learned and the importance of being self-sufficient to fund my education. I worked at a local tutoring agency to reduce the need for student loans. Mid-semester, our professor split us into groups. At first I was dreading the project, but my attitude changed when I found out that Cindy was in my group. In political science class, we had to analyze a famous Supreme Court case given to us by our professor. We were required to explain the case, discuss the decision, and argue whether it was a good one. We were assigned Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court's first major case, the first major case with a significant impact on the Supreme Court, a decision that limited the power of the Supreme Court and prevented it from exerting more influence than the other branches of government, a decision that shaped the Supreme Court as we know it today. We got along well, started dating and became exclusive. I had rarely dated before due to a lack of money, but Cindy didn't mind. She liked the simple activities with me, like watching TV or going for walks. Picnics and museum visits were important dates. I fell deeply in love with Cindy, and she seemed to love me just as much. We got married right after we graduated. The first 5 years of our marriage were wonderful. Our sex life was great, and our little house was perfect for us. We made lots of friends quickly because we lived in a new neighborhood, and our social life was very active. Cindy worked as an 8th-grade teacher at a middle school in North Palm Beach County, and I got a job at a large engineering firm in South Florida. However, as time went on, I realized that I didn't like engineering work, because I was only a junior engineer and could only do boring work to escape the monotony. I decided to pursue a master's degree, thinking that I could get a pay rise and work on more interesting projects. But I only got a bonus of $500, which was very disappointing. I thought, forget it, I might as well go for a doctorate, even though the work is boring. Overall, everything was fine. Cindy's career was booming, and we were deeply in love. We were doing well financially, and we talked about starting a family. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. The first piece of bad news came when my boss told me I was being transferred from design to inspection. Inspection is even more tedious than design. The second piece of good news was that Cindy was going to be the head of the guidance department at West Jupiter High School. This promotion would later prove to be a big mistake. The third major problem in my life was the appointment of Brock Turner as the principal of Cindy's school. He was a former NFL player who had played for 5 different teams over 5 seasons. Brock was drafted by Dallas in the 3rd round as a linebacker, but was traded after 2 seasons despite his outstanding performance. He spent 2 years in Seattle before being traded to Philadelphia, where he had another solid season before a serious ankle sprain in the playoffs ended his career. Realizing his football career was over, Brock tried working in television, where his natural charisma failed him and he was fired after his on-screen arrogance resulted from his natural charm. He then took a job in customer service at a regional bank, but quit after 9 months because he didn't like office work. Brock eventually became a physical education teacher and football coach at a high school in a Philadelphia suburb, where he worked for more than 3 years, rising to the positions of vice principal and head football coach. The team had a good record, but never had any success in the playoffs. After Cindy's school principal retired, Brock applied for the position, and in the first year of work, I talked about Brock more than Cindy. I was impressed by him because he was an NFL player, but when I met him, my opinion changed. I found him to be self-righteous and arrogant, while his wife, Apple, was charming, intelligent and a little shy. She was like a smaller Whitney Houston, stunningly beautiful. I couldn't understand why she was with Brock, but most of the school staff, including Cindy, were charmed by him. I tried to hint to Cindy that her boss was a womanizer, but she just laughed and said I was jealous. I decided to come clean. Yes, I admitted, I was a little jealous. He was taller and stronger than me, and he was a former professional rugby player. Cindy hugged me and said, "You don't need to be jealous. He's only a few inches taller than me, and you're in great shape yourself. And even if he used to play rugby, so what? I chose you." Her reassurance calmed me down, and we continued to get along, even though I felt uneasy around Brock. Cindy always dragged me to all the school events, and we always sat with the Brocks. At these events, I occasionally got to chat with April, and found out that she and Brock had been married for 3 years and had a little girl named Tiffany. One night at the school Christmas party, I saw that Brock was a total jerk. If Cindy thinks I'm jealous, it's nothing compared to Brock's behavior toward April at the party. Brock asked Cindy to dance without even bothering to ask me first. I thought it was rude, and I was annoyed because Cindy didn't even look at me to see if I was okay with it. I watched for a while and noticed that Brock kept his distance from Cindy. I went over to talk to April, and we had a nice chat. I found out that she is an adjunct professor at a local community college that recently became a 4-year institution. She teaches French and German. Her mother's family moved from the Congo to France, and her father is German. Her parents moved to the United States before April was born in April, and because the college only recently became a 4-year institution, they are still filling teaching positions. April was hoping her part-time job would become a full-time associate professor. As we talked, she showed me pictures of her daughter, who looked like a miniature version of April. I laughed as April told me about all the cute things Tiffany did. By the end of the 3rd song, Brock and Cindy returned to the table. Brock seemed annoyed that I was talking to his wife. "You're sitting in my seat," he said sternly. I was shocked by his tone, but apologized and moved the chair. Then I offered to buy drinks for everyone, and April asked for a Shirley Temple and Cindy asked for a Coke. On my way back, Brock grabbed my arm, snatched the drink from my hand and threatened me, telling me to stay away from my wife or I'd punch you. "What's wrong with you?" I asked, shocked by his aggressive attitude. He answered as we walked, and soon after Brock announced that he and April were leaving. His sudden departure was surprising, as was Cindy's angry glare. On the way home, Cindy confronted me, "What did you do to annoy Brock?" "I didn't do anything," I retorted. "You must have done something, because he was really angry." Cindy insisted, "He threatened to punch me if I didn't stay away from his wife." "I was just being polite, and you didn't even check if I agreed when you danced." "What do you mean by that?" Cindy asked me to leave it alone, and I interrupted her angrily. "I don't want to discuss Brock anymore." After the Christmas party, my opinion of Brock had changed from uncomfortable to downright repulsive, but I didn't want to get into trouble because he was Cindy's boss. Fortunately, Cindy rarely mentioned Brock after that Christmas event. The new year passed. A few months later, the economy took a serious downturn, and the real estate market bore the brunt of it. My company was not affected because we were fully booked, but as time went on and no new projects came along, people became anxious. I buried my head in work, but I knew that if the economy did not improve, layoffs could happen at any time. Cindy came home in high spirits because she had been chosen to organize the school career convention. I couldn't understand why she was so excited, because I thought the students were only interested in getting out of class for a few hours. Nevertheless, I supported her enthusiasm. If I had known that she had been given the task by Brock, I might have been less willing to help, but as it turned out, I was glad that I did. She had already lined up an accountant, a lawyer, a nurse, a computer programmer and several other professionals to speak. Cindy asked if I could arrange for one of the company's engineers to give a short talk. The next day I asked my boss, and he approved, but on the condition that I take a day off since it was for Cindy. I agreed. The Career Day program was scheduled to last 2 hours, with 12 different professionals speaking for 10 minutes each. However, on Career Day, 4 of the speakers either cancelled or failed to show up. Cindy was very anxious and almost cried. I reassured her not to worry and covered for the absent accountant, lawyer, car mechanic and doctor. When it was my turn to speak, I gave Cindy a kiss and told her not to worry. As I walked up the stairs towards the stage, I noticed a group of high school students looking very bored. They had to go back to class because my slides weren't ready yet. I started my speech, "Good afternoon, if you are asleep, please raise your hand." Almost every hand went up, and the students laughed. Now they were paying attention. I hope you find my talk interesting, and if not, at least it will give you a chance to rest for a while. The students cheered. I took a deep breath and began my speech. I am an engineer, but today I want to talk about a few different careers, and I will also give some practical advice on how to succeed, including how to reduce stress and get through high school. Many of the students laughed, but sat up straighter. I was really getting into it. I started with a joke about engineers, who you might think are just a bunch of nerds, but that is not the case. Let me tell you a story to illustrate how practical engineers are. One day, an engineering student rode his brand new bike across campus. An engineer, who was also there, said, "Wow, that's an awesome bike, where did you get it?" The first student replied, "You're not going to believe this, but a girl came up to me, took off all her clothes, and said I could have anything I wanted." Another engineer said, "That's great, you made a good choice, her clothes probably didn't fit you." Then I concluded, engineers are very practical, which caused everyone to laugh. I then showed a slide with various buildings and structures, including one showing a carpet museum with a roof that looked like a rolled-up carpet. Another slide showed crooked houses that seemed to lean in different directions. I also showed a building that looked like a giant picnic basket. I ended the slideshow with an ordinary 9-story building and asked if anyone could guess what was special about it. After a few guesses, I revealed the answer. You'll never guess, it's Europe's largest brothel, 9 stories high, and it's located in Germany. If you're interested, the guys cheered, while the girls expressed varying degrees of surprise. Next, I switched topics and discussed the average salary and required education for different professions. I told lots of jokes and shared study and exam tips. I firmly believe that to succeed at anything, you should always aim to be better than you are. This may seem counterintuitive, but I explained that if you don't try to improve yourself, you won't get better. I also emphasized that there is no such thing as a stupid question, and that it is wise to ask for help, unlike some people who are reluctant to do so. Finally, I talked about those who choose to work in trade instead of going to college. I encouraged those who are interested in this path and explained that they may earn more than many college graduates. I had a great time and didn't realize I'd gone over the allotted time until Cindy motioned for me to finish. Before I ended, I gave everyone a piece of advice. Everyone has the opportunity to give a public speech, and it's one of the biggest fears people have, sometimes even more than death. Most of you will eventually face this challenge. When it happens, remember to stand up straight so everyone can see you speak, and so everyone can hear you. Then, keep your speech short and sit down quickly, so people will thank you. Thank you, you were wonderful. I got a standing ovation, a kiss from Cindy and a handshake from Brock, but that wasn't what I didn't know. The other 3 high school principals were also there and invited me to speak at their schools. I mentioned that I had taken personal leave to speak for Cindy, but in the end Cindy convinced me to speak at the other schools. The 3 speeches went very well, and the last stop was at a middle school in a poor area, where the principal said he hoped I would become their teacher. I felt like I was on top of the world, but soon things took a turn for the worse. One Monday morning, I was called into my boss's office and told I was being laid off. The severance package was reasonable, including 3 months' salary and health insurance. When I got home and told Cindy the news of the layoffs, her first reaction was, "Oh great, now how are we going to pay the mortgage?" I just looked at her and said, "Thanks for your support," and then got a beer from the fridge and went into the den we used as an office. I turned on the computer and started looking for a job. A few minutes later, Cindy came in quietly and apologized, saying she was just worried about losing the house. I kissed her and gave her a hug. "Don't worry, the company gave me 3 months severance pay, and I'm sure I'll find a job before then." However, as the severance pay began to run out and I still couldn't find a job, Cindy's pressure to find a job increased day by day. The atmosphere in our home became increasingly tense as I was rejected again and again. I began to feel like a failure. Then something happened that made me feel even worse. Star High School's vice principal, Alan Ryder, went to California to find a new job. Brock soon promoted Cindy to take over his position. From then on, I had to listen to everyone talk about how much they loved Mr. Turner, how the teachers thought he was great, and that he was being considered for the vice principal position. My dislike for Brock Turner reached new heights, because I had been unemployed for 4 months. I felt that Cindy was becoming increasingly disrespectful to me. Then, an unexpected opportunity appeared on the evening news. There was a story about a new program designed to attract teachers to schools in low-income areas. The program considered life experience in lieu of a teaching certificate, but once hired, teachers were required to obtain a teaching certificate within 2 years. Since I had yet to find work in my field, I decided to apply. The next morning, I faxed my resume to the school board, and early that afternoon, I scheduled an interview for the following day. I didn't tell Cindy because I didn't want to raise her expectations. After the interview, I was offered the job. At the time, I didn't realize it, but as soon as my resume appeared on the HR computer screen, they did a quick search and found a video of me giving a career talk, which expedited my hiring process. They offered me a position at Rivier High School, the lowest-ranked school in the county. Despite its fancy name, the district had struggled for years. I accepted the job teaching math and science at Rivier High School, where only 6% of students are ready for college after graduation, despite its fancy name. When Cindy came home that night, I couldn't wait to share the news of my new job and expected her to be happy and supportive. However, she looked very shocked and said she didn't want me to take the job because it was too dangerous. She told me about some terrible things that had happened at the school, such as metal detectors at every entrance, security guards in the corridors, and 3 teachers who had been attacked last year, one of whom had been stabbed. Cindy also reminded me that I had no teaching experience and that I didn't think I could last even a week. After talking to several people and hearing more shocking stories, I was very nervous on my first day. The school didn't look good either. The building was old and poorly maintained, with graffiti on the front and even worse inside. The students ran through the hallways like they owned the place, and there were security guards everywhere, including outside the toilets. I had lots of ideas for lessons, but I decided to observe the situation first rather than start preparing my lesson straight away. I used math and science games that were fun and simple, and the students learned some of the material they would need for the final exam without even realizing it. The new principal of the school, Ben Carlson, was very strict. He was 240 pounds tall, black, and would not tolerate any nonsense. So it became clear to the students very quickly that it would be unwise to anger him. He believed strongly in strict discipline, and I agreed with him. I especially appreciate his approach of removing all gang members from the regular class and placing them in a separate class with a rotating teacher and 3 security guards. Any gang member who misbehaves receives a warning and is expelled by the 3rd week. The most troublesome gang members are either expelled or leave on their own. It may sound harsh, but some students are beyond help. My wife underestimated my ability to stick at something. Not only did I survive the first week, but by December I was thriving. I had revamped the curriculum, added a series of new games, and the students were responding really well. Other teachers were starting to adopt some of my ideas, and they seemed to be working. By the end of the year, Riviera High School had risen from 58th to 51st in academic rankings, and I was nominated for Teacher of the Year. I wasn't selected, but the nomination was an honor in itself. I was a bit frustrated because Cindy didn't seem to be happy with my work. She kept asking me when I would stop wasting time and go back to engineering. I finally told her that I would never go back to engineering because I loved teaching. She wasn't happy with my choice, but she seemed to accept it during the Christmas break. I decided to finally pursue a doctorate, which I delayed due to the economic downturn. I wasn't particularly interested in mechanical engineering, but I was very interested in computers, so I chose to pursue a doctorate in computer engineering. About a year ago, I learned from my last chat with April that she was pursuing a doctorate in comparative studies at Florida Atlantic University. I looked into the doctoral program at Florida Atlantic University and decided to pursue a doctorate in computer engineering there. I worked at Riviera Beach High School for another year, during which time our academic ranking rose from 51st to 46th. The school board promoted Cindy to vice principal at West Jupiter High School, but everything changed that summer, in the course of our lives. I received good news. Brock was promoted to vice principal and Cindy was appointed the new principal of West Jupiter High School. Although I still didn't trust Brock, I was relieved that his new position meant he would be working at district headquarters. Cindy still had to go to headquarters once a week, although she wouldn't see him every day. At first, I was unhappy about this, but then I learned that it was typical for the new rules. I continued at the FAU, which is about 40 minutes away from my home, because April is also doing her doctorate there. I suggested that we carpool, and April liked the idea, but when she told Brock about it, he got really angry and immediately called me to threaten to beat me up. I had expected him to object to carpooling, but not to be so hostile. I was disappointed because I really enjoyed talking to April and the carpool would have made the ride more pleasant. Nevertheless, April and I often met for coffee during recess, sometimes joined by others, but at first it was just the two of us. We only talked about trivial things at first, but over time, our discussions became more and more wide-ranging. Despite Brooke's jealousy of my relationship with April, we became close friends, and she even suggested that I apply for a position at the newly established four-year college. I appreciated her advice, but explained that I was considering a position as a guidance counselor at a new high school. Over coffee and conversation, I discovered some details about April and Brooke. I learned that April graduated from Stanford with honors and moved back to her parents' home in Philadelphia. She met Brock at a charity event and didn't like him at first, but Brock was persistent and they eventually started dating. It didn't take long for April to fall deeply in love with him. Brock was completely loyal to her, as evidenced by the way he kept other men away from April. About a year after they got married, they had Tiffany. April did mention that Brock rarely spent time with their daughter and was impatient with her. He always wanted a son. You must be kidding. I laughed. Tiffany is a sweet little girl. If Cindy and I had a daughter, I hope she's like Tiffany. Thank you. One evening during class, April gave me a kiss on the cheek. Our teacher started to feel unwell and had to leave. I could have left 20 minutes earlier, but I chose to stay and have coffee with April. When April arrived with a few of her classmates, I brought her coffee and she walked over to where I was sitting while her classmates went to get their drinks. "You didn't have to do that, Todd," she said with a smile. "It's no problem," I responded with a smile. I stayed for about 15 minutes and when I went back for a second coffee, I realized your class was almost over, so it really wasn't a big deal. "Did your class end early?" April asked, sipping her coffee. "Yes, the teacher is sick." April was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Todd, I envy you. I should have continued my studies, but Brock now wants me to have a second child, hopefully a boy, but if I do, my doctoral studies will be delayed for a few years and I will lose my chance to become an associate professor." So I told him that I would not consider having another child until I had completed my doctoral studies. He wasn't happy about that. In April's bag, she pulled out her phone and whispered, "Oh no, what do I do?" I asked. "I have to tell Brock that I have to work overtime and meet with my advisor, but my phone is dead. Can I use yours?" "Sure, but do you think that's a good idea?" April thought for a moment, then agreed, "You're right, there's no need to make things worse. Amy, can I borrow your phone?" April quickly dialed Brock's number. I heard her say, "Oh no, another problem." I asked, "Yes?" April answered me dejectedly, "I told Brock that his voicemail was full 2 days ago, but he hasn't cleaned it up yet." "Todd, of course. What do you need?" April rummaged through her backpack and found a piece of paper in an envelope. She wrote a note and sealed it in the envelope. "Can you drop this off at my house on your way? Won't Brock be upset? Just tell him I tried to reach him, but his voicemail was still full, so I caught you on your way out and asked you to take this note. I didn't want to make him come here, because I'm running late, even though I'm not really keen on delivering this note." I agreed, figuring he wouldn't be too upset, since I was just delivering a message from his wife. Nevertheless, I couldn't get rid of the old saying, "The one who harms others will be harmed in return," and I laughed to myself as I turned into Turner Street. My unease turned to confusion when I saw my wife's Volkswagen parked in Brock's driveway. I couldn't understand why Cindy would be at Brock's house at this time. I parked in the street and tried to understand why Cindy would be there. I wanted to find a reason or explanation, but nothing came to mind. I decided to check around the house. There were lights downstairs and most of the blinds were open. I crept around to the side of the house, as I had never been there before and I didn't know what to expect when I went to Brock's house. I looked through the first window, which was the living room, the second was the kitchen and the third was the dining room. As I walked around to the back of the house, I noticed that most of the curtains in the fourth room were drawn, but 2 were partially raised and 1 window was slightly open. What happened next shocked me. Brock was sitting naked on a straight-backed chair, and he was putting on a condom. His penis was huge, about 8 inches long and quite thick, and that was when Cindy appeared. I managed to get out my phone and start recording. Cindy giggled. "I can't believe how big it is. When I first saw it, I didn't think it would fit, but now all I can think about is having you inside me." Brock growled, "Come here, let me put it inside you." Cindy moaned, "I hope you don't wear a condom. I want you to finish inside me so I can have your baby." I felt sick, but what happened next was even worse. Brock said, "Let's go upstairs, we have time for one more before April gets back." The witch kept asking when we could be together all the time. Cindy asked, "Soon?" Brock replied, "I have to sort out my finances first. I don't want April to take everything." Cindy laughed and went upstairs with Brock. I stumbled back to the car, drove to the nearest parking lot, and broke down in tears. I couldn't believe Cindy would betray me like this. We had been talking about starting a family, and now she wanted her lover to get her pregnant. After the initial shock, my anger was stronger than ever. It was clear that my marriage was over, and the only thing I could think about was how much pain I could cause them. I had the video, but I wasn't sure if it would hurt them too much if they really were in love. I didn't know how to get revenge, but the idea of revenge soon came to me, because April Brock had mentioned that he intended to leave his wife with almost nothing, so I needed to warn her. I drove back to the FA as quickly as I could, overwhelmed by anger and tears. Although I arrived quickly, I was worried that April might have already left. I was relieved to see her car parked among the many parked cars. About 10 minutes later, April came out, and I met her outside. She immediately noticed how sad I was and looked worried. She asked if something had happened to Brock or Tiffany and was obviously very worried. I shook my head. As far as I know, they are both in good health, but I have some very painful news for you. Your husband is having an affair with my wife. This is not funny. Todd Apple said, I know you don't like my husband, but I won't accept the story you made up about him. I hope this isn't true, and if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes and recorded it, I wouldn't believe it myself." Apple put down her bag and purse and began to tremble. Picking up her things, she said, "We need to talk. Although it's hard to accept, you have to know that this is true, and I'm not lying." I sat her in the passenger seat, turned on the video and handed her the phone. Before the video ended, April started crying uncontrollably. I took back the phone, knelt down and looked her in the eye. "I know this is all happening very suddenly. You haven't had time to process it yet, but I've decided to divorce Cindy because Brock said in the video that he planned to hide his assets before divorcing you." I couldn't hear it clearly, and April looked confused, so I played the video again. April was no longer shocked, but furious. I had heard rumors about Brock before and during the marriage, but I didn't believe them. "But if he thinks he can take your wife and leave me with nothing, he's in for a surprise." April realized what she had said and apologized. "I'm sorry I called your wife names." "Don't worry, you were just telling the truth." After confirming that April could drive home, I sent her the video of Cindy and Brock. When I got home, Cindy was either asleep or pretending to be. I didn't care, went to the office, turned on the computer, and started planning for the next morning after Cindy left at around 8:30. I took a shower, got ready to take care of some finances, and then left. I found a divorce lawyer online and made an appointment for the next day. Cindy and I don't have much in the way of assets. Our house has almost no equity, so it will either have to be sold or Cindy will have to buy me out. We have joint checking, savings and investment accounts totaling about $75,000. Cindy has a retirement account with the Florida Retirement System and I have a 401k that I recently transferred to the Florida Retirement System. I thought dividing the assets would be simple, but I need to consult a lawyer first to understand my specific situation. I know Florida is a no-fault divorce state and that videos are not admissible in court, but it may be possible to get Cindy to agree to the divorce if she plans to file an objection before 10 a.m. I've done everything I can, so I started looking for a small apartment. A studio in Lake Park, and then went home to pack up, around 2 p.m. I realized the new apartment wasn't big enough, so I also rented a self-storage unit nearby. If Cindy noticed anything missing, she didn't mention it. I lived in the study, preparing for possible new jobs. I slept on the sofa there, and the next day before I woke up, Cindy was gone. I met with my divorce lawyer, Alicia Smithson. She was a nonsense middle-aged woman. I showed her the video and explained what Cindy had done. She told me the video would not help with the divorce. She also warned me not to post the video online, as I could face legal consequences. That evening, I kept waiting for Cindy to come home so I could confront her. At around 9 p.m., she came back and walked past me in the living room. "Cindy, we need to talk," I shouted. "I'm tired and need to take a shower," Cindy said, on the stairs. "I don't care if you have Brooke's stuff on you," I retorted, "or if we need to talk now." Cindy stopped at the bottom of the stairs, turned around and asked what you're talking about. "Come in, I'll explain." I said, "Stand up." Cindy cautiously walked into the living room. "I think you owe me an apology for the way you just treated me." She said, "I don't think so." I said, when I opened my laptop and played the video, the screen quickly showed Cindy riding on top of Brooke. Cindy glanced at the video and then closed the laptop. "Since you've already found out, I guess I don't have to hide it anymore," Cindy said, without regret. I laughed. "Cindy, remember when you said that people should learn something new every day?" Cindy glanced at the video and then closed the laptop. "Since you found out, I don't think I need to hide it anymore," Cindy said without regret. I laughed. "Cindy, do you remember when you said that people should learn something new every day?" "Yes, so what?" She snapped. "It seems you haven't learned your lesson. When I warned you that Brock was a womanizer, now he's turned you into his mistress. There's no need to be rude. Cindy said angrily, I know. This must be a blow to your pride, but a better man has taken you away from me. I hope we can end this amicably. I laughed out loud, because you don't want to face reality, and you're on your own now. I have rented an apartment and moved some of your things there. I will come back for the rest later. You can continue to live here until the divorce is final. After that, the house will either be sold or you can buy out my share. On Friday, I moved into my new home. Cindy was as usual, but the first few days were incredibly painful. I could hardly get out of bed, go to the toilet or eat. Fortunately, it was summer and I was under no obligation. All day long I thought about how I could get back at them, but I couldn't think of anything. On the third day, I forced myself to get up, took a shower, and went to the grocery store to buy some things. When I got home, I turned on the small TV in the kitchen. The small TV was showing a celebrity gossip show, which immediately caught my attention. Former NFL linebacker Brock Turner and his wife had divorced after 3 years of marriage. The rumors of Brock's infidelity seem to be true, as his wife April has filed for divorce on grounds of infidelity. Our reporter spoke to Mr. Turner earlier today. Mr. Turner, is it true that your wife caught you with another woman? Brock smiled sadly and said, my wife and I are going through a difficult time, and we are trying to clear up a huge misunderstanding. We would like some privacy while we try to repair our marriage. I wasn't happy with his answer. I hadn't spoken to April since I first told her that her husband was having an affair with my wife. Brock had ruined my marriage, and now it seemed so unfair that he and April might be trying to work things out. Again, I felt anger and sadness, but when my phone rang, fear mixed in. Before I could answer, the other person started talking. Listen, asshole, I know you took those pictures with your cheating wife, you know I live in your house, I'm having a great time with her, and you better watch the 6 o'clock news tonight because you're in trouble. I was shocked that Brock called me, but after a few seconds, I had to think, and I realized it wasn't hard for him to figure out that I took the video. As scared as I wasn't going to let him see it. Lucky for me, because Cindy is about to become my ex-wife. I tried to sound more confident than I felt, and if you live there, I guess you haven't managed to work that misunderstanding out yet. I just watched the 6 o'clock news, and you won't be so cocky anymore. Then he said and hung up. Worried about what Brock might do to me, I turned on the local news at 6. It wasn't until about 10 minutes in that the news anchor said that Palm Beach County Superintendent of Schools Shish Crawford resigned today to take a position at the Department of Education in Washington. Deputy Superintendent Brock Turner has been named interim superintendent, but it is widely expected that he will be offered the permanent position. A deep fear welled up in my heart. Now I understood what Brock meant when he said that my life was in trouble, because he was the superintendent and I was just a teacher, and he was my boss. Brock could make my job intolerable, even frame me to cover up his own mistakes. I needed to get out from under his control. At first I thought about resigning and going back to being an engineer, but the economy was just beginning to recover, and I needed a steady income to support myself and pay for divorce lawyers. Cindy's lawyers made ridiculous demands. They wanted me to pay $50,000 to buy Cindy's share of the house, which was absurd. Cindy also wanted me to drop the adultery charges, accused me of hiding money, and demanded that I pay for a forensic accountant to investigate our finances, even though her demands were unreasonable. I still needed to pay for a lawyer to represent me, and I felt a little anxious. I remembered mentioning in April that the university where she worked was looking for part-time teachers, and I quickly called their human resources department to inquire about it. They told me to apply online. Long story short, after reviewing my qualifications, they hired me to teach algebra, pre-calculus, and calculus. I got a 1-year contract and was paid about 80% of what I was making teaching high school. I found teaching at the university level more rewarding than teaching high school. In high school, I was always trying to come up with new ways to grab my students' attention, but at the university, most students really want to learn and get excited if I make the material interesting. After 2 weeks of work, I was in the cafeteria in April. She seemed as happy to see me as I was, and we had lunch together, talking about each other's lives. April told me that Brock was fighting for the divorce and stalling, and that he had even asked for sole custody of Tiffany, but a video of him caring for his daughter with his wife had convinced the judge that he was not fit to have full custody. April said the divorce would still be delayed indefinitely. I explained that my own divorce had taken longer than I expected, but seemed to be finally coming to an end. I couldn't believe I had believed Brock's lies. April pushed her half-eaten sandwich away as she said, "I'd heard the rumors, but Brock has a way of making what he says sound convincing. He must be a persuasive man, because he'd managed to convince my wife to cheat on me." I said sadly, "Cindy always said people should learn something new every day, and this is a lesson I could have learned. I'm sorry about this." Todd Apple said, holding my hand, "You're one of the nicest people I've ever met." After that first lunch, Apple and I had lunch almost every day, often met for afternoon tea, and later for dinner and outings. I had feelings for Apple, but I didn't want to risk ruining our friendship. Still, I wanted more. When the circus came to town, I decided to ask her out. The circus is in town this weekend. At lunch, I mentioned that I planned to take Tiffany there one day, but she was difficult. April sighed and said that she still didn't understand why her father didn't want to see her. He told me that if I agreed to the divorce, he would pay child support but would have no contact with Tiffany. I hope you don't mind me saying so, but Brock is a total jerk. I said this with a hint of anger, but then laughed. If you want to go to the circus, I'm sure will be more than enough to take care of a 4-year-old. We had a great time at the circus that day. In addition to the circus, there was also a small fair that day. In the afternoon, April took my hand, Tiffany took the other hand, and Tiffany was holding a stuffed unicorn. When we arrived at their house, I took the unicorn for her. I walked them to the door and tried to kiss April's cheek, but she held me back and kissed my lips. Left, I kissed her back. I felt Tiffany tug at my pants. Tiffany said she reached her free arm towards me. I picked her up and kissed her cheeks. "Thank you for letting me go with your mom and for being so good today." Tiffany beamed when she heard the praise. Just as I was about to set her down, Apple asked, "Do you want to stay for dinner?" "Favorite pizza?" "I like pizza," I said as I put Tiffany back on my hip. "I would love to have dinner with two lovely ladies." Tiffany got ketchup all over her face, and I couldn't help laughing every time. She made slurping sounds while eating spaghetti, and Apple wiped her face while I wiped my hands for her. Tiffany grabbed my hand and placed it next to hers, and then asked me why my skin was so dark, while yours is so white. I glance at April, who is beaming with amusement, and reply that because of that you and Mum are much prettier than I am. "You're silly," Tiffany giggles. "Boys aren't pretty, they're handsome." "Do you think I'm handsome?" "Yes, Mum thinks so too." "All right, young lady, that's enough." April hastens to say that it's time for a bath, and then a bedtime story. After the bath, Tiffany asked if I could read her a story, and I gladly agreed. I ended up reading her 2 stories, using different voices for all the characters. Tiffany loved it, but she wouldn't go to sleep until I kissed her goodnight. After Tiffany fell asleep, April and I sat on the sofa drinking wine and chatting about teaching. Suddenly April put down her wine glass, took mine from me and set it aside, then leaned over and gave me a passionate kiss. I was surprised that this beautiful woman would kiss me, because I often thought that she was one of the most charming women I had ever met. "We need to move this to my bedroom," she said. April whispered, "Please be gentle. Brooke is so big that it sometimes hurts," so I entered her slowly until I was completely inside. God, it felt so good. April exclaimed, "You fit perfectly." After that night, April and I became very close, but we decided not to live together until the divorce was final. I finished my divorce first, and I was relieved when the final court date arrived. I was there when Cindy and Brock walked into the courtroom. Cindy was smiling triumphantly and had her arm around Brock's shoulder. He was grinning from ear to ear, especially after he kissed her, before sitting down. I asked April not to come because I suspected Brock would be there. The divorce proceedings went smoothly. The judge simply asked the lawyers if they were satisfied, and when they said they were, he knocked on the table, and the divorce was over. April's divorce took nearly 3 months longer to finalize. During this time, April and I both completed our PhDs. Shortly afterwards, April found a job as an associate professor. I didn't get the professorship, but I was offered a 2-year teaching contract, which was unusual because previously the college had only offered 1-year contracts. This was because my courses were so popular that there was a waiting list for each class. I also agreed to teach an additional course in pre-calculus because there were so many students who wanted to sign up. I now earn about 25% more than I did as a high school teacher, and I am expected to be offered an associate professorship in the near future. Things are going better than I expected, but then I had some difficulties because I had to go to Atlanta for a 3-day seminar. The seminar ran from morning to night, with only short breaks, and the group study sessions often continued late into the night. At the end of each day, I collapsed exhausted into bed, only to start all over again the next day. I explained the schedule to April, so she understood, but Tiffany didn't understand where I had been or why I didn't call when I got back. Tiffany almost cried as soon as I came in the door and asked why I had left her. I tried to explain where I had been, but she kept crying until I gave her the pink dragon toy from one of her favorite books, Rainbow Dragon. Her favorite dragon in the book is the pink dragon named Pink. As soon as I gave her the dragon toy, she screamed with joy and kissed my face. After Tiffany calmed down, we sat down to eat dinner. Children always say interesting things. Tiffany looked at me and asked, "Why don't you live here? I want you to be my daddy." I said, then glanced at April, who was smiling. "I would love to be your daddy, but I don't know what your mommy would think." April, still smiling, said that if you became Tiffany's daddy, her mommy would be very happy, but there was one condition: you had to become my husband first. "Really, you have to marry me?" I asked in surprise. "I thought you would never ask." April giggled and replied, "We had a simple wedding with just a few friends, my dad and April's mom. My mom died when I was 9 and April's dad when she was 15. I was very happy, even though Cindy left me for an ex-NFL player. I felt I got the best deal Cindy could have gotten, with a celebrity. But I'm now married to the most beautiful woman I know, and she has a lovely little daughter whom I love like my own." Throughout the divorce, Brock kept pestering April, showing how much he wanted her back. He pleaded and issued veiled threats, but he never did anything that could get him into trouble. He still lives with Cindy, and as far as I know, she is very happy. I almost feel sorry for her, because I know that Brock will finally show his true colors when Cindy betrays me. I was heartbroken and furious. My obsession with getting revenge on both of them consumed my thoughts, but as I began to build a relationship with April, my anger gradually subsided and my desire for revenge faded. However, fate seemed to have still arranged for me to get my revenge. Soon after, we got married. April and I decided to sell her house and buy a new one closer to the university. We decided to handle the sale ourselves and quickly found a buyer. However, since Brock's name was still on the deed, he needed to sign the sales contract. April called him and at first he was happy, but when he learned that April wanted to sell the house and move closer to school, his attitude quickly changed from happy to nasty. He refused to sign because he was still that jerk. April was prepared for this and reminded Brock that their divorce agreement required him to buy her share. If he didn't sell, it made him very angry and he hung up the phone. However, the next day, he called back and agreed to sign the contract at the closing. April asked Brock if he wanted anything from the house, and he said he didn't want anything and that it was her job to clean everything out. Cleaning out the house was a daunting task, and we saved the basement for last, where I found something of value. April brought in a box full of odds and ends, and in the box was an old laptop, Brock's old one. April said he'd bought a new laptop about 1.5 years after becoming principal of West Jupiter High, so she assumed he'd thrown the old one away. She asked if I could fix the laptop for Tiffany. I told her I could try if the battery would hold a charge overnight. To my surprise, not only was the laptop still functional, but it also had files on it. I had originally planned to just reformat the laptop, but then decided to check the files first to see if there were any photos Tiffany or April might want to keep. The problems I found were not just ordinary errors, but indicated that Brock was not just an ordinary idiot, but a top-level idiot. Yes, there were some photos and videos of April and Tiffany, but most of the files were pictures of naked women with whom Brock had affairs. Each photo or video had a description explaining the duration of the affair and Brock's assessment of each woman. While I didn't recognize most of the women, I did recognize 5 of them, one of whom was the wife of a Dallas quarterback and a famous model. I remembered that the couple divorced shortly after they met, and Brock was traded. I could see why the other 4 women were teachers at West Jupiter High School, 2 of whom were married. Cindy was one of the married teachers. Apparently, Brock had been dating these teachers for about the same amount of time. There were a few photos and 2 videos of my ex-wife. The new video was even more shocking than the one I had previously recorded. I couldn't believe that my once beloved wife had become such a slut, but Brock's comments about Cindy made me laugh. He praised her skills but complained that she was too clingy because she kept asking him to impregnate her, and he even considered having a child with her despite her husband. I was going to delete the files, but then I thought it was an opportunity for revenge. I copied all the explicit content to a flash drive and continued exploring the laptop. What I found next made Brock look like the biggest idiot ever. He left all his financial records on the computer, and I couldn't believe it. Brock had left detailed financial statements, including all his account numbers and passwords. He had hidden his assets during the divorce, and he had accounts in the Cayman Islands in California, which he had not disclosed in court. After checking the other folders, I called April. I first showed her pictures of the women Brock had been with, and then his financial records. I'm not sure which made her more upset, the women or the hidden money. In the end, I think it was the women. I found out that Brock had slept with her bridesmaids, all of her bridesmaids, and even her cousins. Things moved quickly, and April took Brock back to court, accusing him of hiding assets during the marriage. Despite the possibility of jail time, the judge ultimately awarded April 65% of the hidden assets. A large portion of these extra funds went to Tiffany's college fund, and the rest went toward paying the down payment on a house just 2 blocks from the university. Since the divorce, I have been living in a very small apartment, keeping expenses to a minimum, and with my savings and the money from the divorce, I was able to come up with April's down payment. I hadn't yet decided what to do with Brock's top 10 affair list, but I carried the flash drive with me, which I later discovered could have stayed at the West Palm Beach Convention Center College Fair if not for what happened there. I was invited to speak at the fair, and April took time off from work to accompany me. The fair featured booths from about 40 universities and colleges, and high school seniors from nearby schools came to talk to representatives, as well as seminars on how to create a strong college application, choose a major, and succeed in college. As I sat with the college reps, I heard the voice of the person I hate the most. "Brock Turner, look here." "Cindy," Brock said with a smug smile, "it's your poor ex-husband who is funny." "Brock," I said with a forced smile, "because that's what your ex-wife says about you." "You're such an asshole," Todd Brock said, his face turning red. "I'd love to teach you a lesson and teach you to respect people who are better than you." "Don't pay him any mind, Brock," Cindy said, gripping his arm tightly. He's not worth your time. Don't get involved with him. Brock looked at Cindy, then at me, and gave a lewd smile. He leaned over and kissed Cindy deeply. When they parted, Cindy had melted into his kiss. Brock glanced at me triumphantly. I understood. As they turned to leave, I called Cindy over. Cindy, I found some pictures of you on the computer that I thought you might want. You always say that people should learn something new every day. She took the flash drive and muttered a thank you. I didn't realize April had seen everything and then walked straight up to me. She hugged me and gave me a quick kiss. I'm sorry I was gone so long, darling. She said. Brock said something, looking shocked. His face turned red when he noticed April's pregnant belly. Oh, hello, Brock. She said sweetly, are you catching up with my husband? Brock came towards me, but stopped when he saw a security guard passing by. He walked along with Cindy, but looked back several times, looking distracted. That evening, April and I were lying in bed, and I was applying lotion to her belly. We only heard half the news until the announcer started to report new information. Tonight, officers responded to a call at the home of Brock Turner, the school principal, which reportedly involved a domestic dispute. Many details are still unknown, but Mr. Turner currently appears to have a non-life-threatening knife wound. We know he is in the hospital, and Cindy Albee has been taken to the county jail. I laughed and said to April, Cindy seems to have learned something new today.